All right, so we're diving into The Jungle by Upton Sinclair.
Oh yeah, a classic.
Yeah, and I know it's really famous for that look at the meatpacking industry back in the early 1900s Chicago.
Right.
But you're kind of interested in more than just the sausage making details, right?
Yeah.
So you want to understand the wider social impact of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating because Sinclair himself, he was really aiming for kind of a socialist revolution with this book. He
Hmm.
wanted to expose, the just absolutely brutal conditions that these immigrant workers were facing,
Yeah.
but it was the public's just absolute disgust at the unsanitary food production that,
Yeah.
that really grabbed the attention and sparked change. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an accidental success story in a way.
Yeah, it makes you wonder like what would shock us today in the same way.
Sure.
But before we get there, let's go back to the beginning of the book.
Okay.
We got Jurgis and Ona, they're fresh off the boat from Lithuania,
Yeah.
full of hope for the American dream. And then chapter 3 just throws that dream right into the muck of packing down.
Oh, it's a stark contrast. You go from their naive optimism to this just endless grid of identical wooden houses.
Yeah.
The air is so thick with smoke and who knows what else. Sinclair even describes the ground itself as made. Like it's this artificial landscape built from industrial waste.
Wow.
And you have kids scavenging for scraps just to get by. It's really a brutal reality check.
It really is like that idealized image of America just gets completely flipped on its head.
Totally. Yeah.
And then you throw in the actual stockyards experience.
Well, yeah.
I was reading that description of the hog slaughtering process,
Uh-huh.
and I swear I could almost smell it. Just the noise, the heat, the sheer volume of blood.
It's overwhelming.
It's completely overwhelming.
And that's exactly what Sinclair wants you to feel.
Yeah.
He's not just describing the process,
Right.
he's immersing you in it.
Right.
Those shrieks of the animals, the workers moving at this just relentless pace, almost becoming machines themselves.
Yeah.
It's meant to dehumanize both the workers and the process itself.
So you've got this crushing reality of packing town,
Yeah.
but then Sinclair introduces the Veselija,
Okay.
that traditional Lithuanian wedding feast.
Right.
It's like this burst of life and joy in the middle of all this darkness.
Yeah.
Why do you think he included that?
Well, I think it's a reminder that these people are more than just cogs in a machine.
Oh.
They have this rich culture, traditions. They're desperately trying to hold on to
Right
the
on.
Veselija. It becomes this symbol of resilience of community in the face of hardship. But there's also this sense of fragility to it. Sinclair hints at the struggle to maintain these traditions in this new world that's really pressuring them to assimilate.
It's like they're getting squeezed from all sides.
Totally.
And exploitation isn't even limited to the factory floor, is it?
No, not at all.
You've got families like the Shedvillises.
Right.
They get tricked into buying homes they can't afford. They're buried under hidden costs.
Yeah.
Unexpected repairs.
It's all part of that octopus that Sinclair describes.
Like it.
The system designed to keep these families trapped in debt.
Hmm.
And it extends to the children, too. You think about little Stanislaus having to lie about his age to work in that dangerous lard machine.
It's heartbreaking.
Breaks your heart.
It's a brutal indictment of the so-called child labor laws.
Absolutely.
Right? They're supposed to protect these kids.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's forcing families to choose between starvation and putting their children in danger.
Exactly. Sinclair is making the point that laws are only as good as the economic realities they operate within. If a family can't survive without their child's income, then those laws become meaningless.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the tragedies that unfold for Ona and Maria,
Right.
which really expose the specific vulnerabilities of women within this system.
Ona's story is especially devastating.
Oh, it is.
The pregnancy, the added strain on the family, her health deteriorating.
Yeah.
It's all connected to the just impossible conditions she's forced to endure.
Mm-hmm.
The cough, the headaches, even the hysteria.
Right.
It's like her body is rebelling against this exploitation.
And what about Maria?
Yeah.
She starts out so strong and independent.
Yeah.
But eventually she too is ground down by the system.
Right.
She loses her job and ends up, well, we know where she ends up.
Yeah.
It's a bleak reminder that even the strongest among them are vulnerable to these forces.
It's like watching a slow motion train wreck.
It is.
And then all this time you've got Jurgis
Yeah.
initially so optimistic.
Right.
And he slowly transforms into this hardened cynic.
Yeah.
From the joy of his first job to the crushing despair after Ona's death.
Yeah.
his journey mirrors the disillusionment so many workers faced at that time.
And that disillusionment really sets the stage for Jurgis's eventual embrace of socialism,
Right.
which we'll delve into next.
Yeah.
It's a key turning point, not just for Jurgis, but for the book as a whole. Yeah, it's interesting how Sinclair uses Jurgis's journey to kind of showcase the socialist movement and all its complexity.
Right.
He doesn't present it as this like monolithic block, you know?
Right. It's not just one big happy socialist family.
Exactly.
In chapter 29, he goes to that meeting.
Yeah.
And it's like this whirlwind of these passionate speakers.
Right.
And all these conflicting ideas. You've got the religious zealots, the pragmatic reformers, even that philosophical anarchist, Dr. Schliemann, throwing Jurgis for a loop with all this talk of individual freedom.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot, and that's kind of the beauty of it, you know?
Right.
Sinclair doesn't give us this simplified version of socialism.
Yeah.
He's making us grapple with these ideas right alongside Jurgis, showing us how he forms his own understanding of what it could mean for him and his fellow workers.
Yeah, it's definitely a process of discovery for him.
It is.
And not always a smooth one.
Right.
And Sinclair doesn't shy away from those internal debates and disagreements either.
No, not at all.
Like that contrast between Lucas, that fiery evangelist for the cause, and Schliemann, the more intellectual, detached theorist.
Right.
They both want this cooperative commonwealth. But their motivations and their approaches are completely different.
It's almost like a microcosm of the broader movement itself, you know?
Yeah.
You have that emotional appeal, the moral imperative.
Right.
Versus the more reasoned intellectual argument.
Right. And then you throw in someone like Tommy Hines, that old school populist firebrand.
Oh, yeah.
Who runs the hotel where Jurgis ends up working.
Right.
He's been fighting the good fight for decades.
Yeah.
Going from one progressive cause to the next.
Yeah, he's a great character.
He's such a great character.
He represents that strain of American radicalism that's always been there, bubbling under the surface.
And his hotel becomes this hotbed of socialist activity.
It does.
With all the staff being party members.
Yeah.
Constantly debating and discussing these ideas with the guests.
It's like Socialism 101. You know?
Yeah, 24/7.
24/7, exactly. And it highlights how these ideas are spreading beyond just the intellectual elite. They're seeping into the everyday lives of working people.
But Sinclair doesn't just focus on the theoretical side, does he?
No, he doesn't.
We also see Jurgis throwing himself into the practical work of the movement.
He does.
Organizing rallies, distributing pamphlets, trying to convert anyone who will listen.
Yeah, he's a man on a mission.
He's like a man on a mission.
Yeah.
Remember that scene where he's helping distribute copies of The Appeal to Reason back in Packingtown?
Oh, yeah.
It's this really powerful moment of coming full circle.
It is.
He's trying to undo the damage he caused when he was working for that corrupt political boss, Mike Scully.
Right. It shows how deeply his experience and his newfound political awareness have transformed him.
Yeah.
He's not just trying to survive anymore.
Right.
He's actively fighting for a better future, both for himself and for his community.
And it's not just individual action either.
No.
Sinclair shows us the movement mobilizing on this larger scale.
He does.
They're organizing strikes, supporting labor unions, taking on that octopus.
Right.
That he describes as this all-encompassing capitalist system.
That metaphor of the octopus is so brilliant.
It is.
It captures the feeling of this vast, sprawling system.
Yeah.
With its tentacles wrapped around every aspect of society.
And remember, this is all happening during a time of massive social and political upheaval.
Absolutely.
The early 1900s. A period of rapid industrialization, waves of immigration, and growing labor unrest.
Right. The socialist movement was seen by many as a radical but necessary response to these challenges.
So we see these diverse voices within the movement.
Yeah.
We see Jurgis's personal transformation.
Right.
And we see this broader context of social change.
Yeah.
But do these ideas actually lead to any tangible results?
Right.
Does anything really change?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And Sinclair doesn't shy away from the obstacles the movement faces.
Right.
He portrays the immense power of that octopus, the resistance from the political establishment, the constant threat of violence and repression.
And then there's the personal cost, too.
Yeah.
Jurgis tries to reunite with Maria, but she's trapped in that horrific world of prostitution.
Right.
A victim of the very system he's fighting against.
It's a harsh reminder that even with all his newfound political awareness, he can't escape the brutal realities of their situation.
It's heartbreaking, but it speaks to the complexity of the problem Sinclair is tackling.
It does.
But even with these challenges, there's this glimmer of hope.
Right.
A sense of possibility.
There is.
The socialist movement is gaining momentum.
Yeah.
Its message is resonating with more and more people.
Yeah.
It all builds toward that climactic election night, doesn't it?
It does.
The Socialist Party makes significant gains across the country.
Yeah.
And Jurgis is swept up in the excitement,
right,
believing that real change is finally within reach.
Uh-huh.
What did you think of that ending?
Well, it's both triumphant and uncertain, I think. You know,
yeah.
On one hand, you have this surge of hope, this feeling that maybe a more just world is possible.
Yeah.
But then you also have Jurgis's personal struggles.
Right.
That lingering sense of loss. It's like Sinclaire is saying, yes, the movement is gaining ground, but the personal cost of this fight is immense, and the battle is far from over.
Yeah. It's a powerful way to end the book.
It is.
Leaving us with that mix of hope and uncertainty.
Right.
But we're not just talking about a historical document here, are we?
We're not.
The jungle still has relevance today, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what would a modern-day The Jungle look like?
Right.
If Sinclair were writing today, what systems would he be exposing?
Oh, that's a good question.
What would be our meatpacking industry scandal?
He might turn his attention to the gig economy. You know,
interesting.
The way workers are classified as independent contractors,
right,
often without benefits or protections.
Yeah.
Or maybe he'd delve into the world of fast fashion, exposing those exploitative labor practices behind those cheap clothes we all wear.
We might not have meatpacking plants exactly like those in the book,
right,
but what about factory farms?
Yeah.
Or the conditions in those massive Amazon warehouses we hear so much about.
Right.
What would shock the public conscience today?
Yeah, and maybe even more importantly, like what deeper issues are we overlooking?
Right.
Just like the plight of those workers was overshadowed by the contaminated food back then.
Exactly.
It's so easy to get caught up in the convenience and affordability of our modern lives.
Yeah.
We don't always stop to consider the hidden costs, the human toll behind the products we consume.
Yeah, and that's what Sinclair forces us to do, to confront those costs, to see the faces behind the things we take for granted.
Absolutely, and that's the lasting power of The Jungle, I think. It's not just a historical account.
Right.
It's a call to action. It challenges us to examine our own roles in these systems, to demand better for ourselves, and for the people who produce the things we rely on.
His message resonates just as strongly today.
It does.
As it did over a century ago.
Absolutely. We need to be vigilant, question the status quo, keep fighting for a more just and humane world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Jungle,
I
want to leave you with this, what resonated most with you? What parallels do you see between the world Sinclair depicts and the world we live in today? And most importantly, what will you do with this knowledge? How will you ensure that the story of The Jungle doesn't repeat itself in a new form?
Good question.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, this was great.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep questioning and exploring.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep